Hey, I'm Mark,
And I'm Craig.
and this is Songwriter's Tales with part two of our incredible interview with the incredible, iconic Ed Seay. Craig, uh, you read the list before the first episode.
Yes, I
If you
did.
watched the first episode, you heard his history, but it's there's so much more that you need to hear from this guy.
Yeah, and if you watch the first episode, that's why you're here
Right.
to get part two. And there's a part three. So we're talking Alison Krauss, Blake Shelton, Garth Brooks, Martina McBride, those kind of people that this man has worked with on their projects. So what do you say, Mark?
Let's do it.
Really, nobody taught me to engineer. I kind of taught myself because, like I was saying, the No Life Club, I would, after everybody'd leave, I'd stay later and pull out tapes and mix them and figure out how to use some of this outboard gear. There were no manuals, nobody to ask. So, I knew where I wanted to get and I wanted to get there quicker. So I stayed up and worked on this stuff. Um, uh, but Paul really taught me how to produce records because he'd been in New York briefly. He'd worked with um, um, some of the guys up there and Chips and so he was very laid back and smooth, but I learned a lot from Paul and and then along the way there was some other Melissa Manchester. Him we walked with her because it was um, Steve Buckingham was out of there were only 2 camps. One was Lowry, where Dorff was, and Steve Buckingham was, and Doug Johnson was, and then
Mhm.
our camp and, at Web 4. For some reason, I think maybe their studio was down, so Buck brought, the Melissa project down there, and we did a couple of albums there, and that's during that project where I met Dorff. He had written a couple of the songs, Fire in the Morning and a few other songs, and, I'd done some string arrangements, uh, but the only problem with Atlanta, although there were pockets of music going on, up in Dorville, Atlanta Rhythm Section, uh,
Right.
and then, after a while down in, Axis, but it used to be Lefevre Studio down there was Kansas, and, um, and and Doppler was a jingle house that,
Mm.
was down in in our place, but there wasn't a the problem with Atlanta was there was no record companies there. The record companies are in New York, LA, and Nashville, and then some in Chicago and some in Miami and other places, but really New York, LA, and Nashville. And so, I looked at those possibilities and I said, "Well, I like LA. LA's fun to work in. New York was great. I really like that. But I said, Nashville's only 4 hours away. Let me run up there and check it out. And so moved up there and then got rolling up in Nashville. And again, there's where a record company was, all the
Yeah.
record companies.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Mhm.
that's kind of how all that got started.
And what year was that you moved up to Nashville?
80, mid 84.
Oh, mid '84. Okay. Okay. Because
And
I met you in the early '90s is when I met you. So I wasn't aware how long you'd been up there.
yeah, yeah, about 84. And it's kind of interesting. When I moved up, I'd never worked on country music because there wasn't any country music in Atlanta. If anybody
Mhm.
was trying to do country music in Atlanta, they'd say, "Well, shoot, just go to Nashville." I mean, that's makes sense.
Mhm.
So um, we, I'm up here, and some of the first work I got was contemporary Christian
Mm.
work. I was up here for uh, 2 weeks and wondering, like everybody does, well, am I going to be the only guy that never breaks in? Is anybody going to ever call? Or
Yeah.
uh, you go looking around, and all of a sudden, a buddy of mine calls and says, "Hey, this uh, this Christian record producer is going to give you a call." And so I said, "Okay." So he calls and says, "Hey, just curious. Um, You don't get a country drum sound, do you?" And I said, no, I guess I get a pop drum sound, uh, okay. I mean, because down in Atlanta with Paul and working with, uh, Commodores and working with Nigel Olsson and working with,
Right.
different things, it wasn't country, and he said, "Great, can you start next week? I want you some projects I want you on." So, did that and, got rolling with that, and then after a couple of years, uh, kind of gravitated on into the country scene, and the weird thing was when I moved up here, there was a country presence, it seemed to me, and I may be wrong, but it seemed like the country divisions were definitely stepchildren of the big labels, and,
Mhm.
because of that, um, they'd put out records and they'd do stuff on the country charts and, didn't have a huge impact in the pop charts or anything else, and for a brief moment, there was a movie out called Urban Cowboy with,
Yeah.
Travolta, and
Yep.
I
Deborah
remember
Winger.
Deborah Winger, and I
Yeah.
remember briefly Nashville was saying, "Hey, man, we're cool. Country music's cool," and then it was like, "Well, wait a second. That movie was cool, and the movie went away, and now we're kinda back to," and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, things started to get a little more edgy. Ricky Skaggs, who, ultimately I started to work with, incredible talent, great guy,
No
uh,
kidding.
he started to, strip away the old Nashville sound, lush strings and all, and, from back in the '60s, and he was doing this tough country stuff, then comping solos together, and he sings like a laser, and the bands were hot, and it was like, yeah, and then there were other things that were starting to come out. One of the groups I was working with, um, was, at the time was Highway 101.
Oh, love those
Paul and I
guys.
Paul Worley and I were working on that,
Mm.
and they kind of came out slamming and bamming. I remember we were cut, the some of the records that really made an impact were, we were over at this studio, uh, called Treasure Isle, and they had 30-foot ceilings, wood room, and
Mm.
mic'd up the room, and so it wasn't a polite little drum sound, it was, "Poo, poo, poo, boo," it was fighting, and, so that was good, and then there was Travis Tritt that was making noise, and all of a sudden, Garth and Shania, and all of a sudden, it's like, wow, it's full on, and then country
Yeah.
music's the
Y
hottest stuff in the world right there. So,
Absolutely.
so it was interesting to see that evolve and to be in the middle of that. We hear about the Wrecking Crew on the West Coast during their heyday, and the,
Mhm.
A-Team up here when pop and country were being made in Nashville back in the '60s and early '70s, and all the Elvis records and all kind of stuff. Al Hurt and up here, but that was the A-Team, and then the Funk Brothers up in Detroit. Well, all of a sudden, what was going on in Nashville in the '90s was like an avalanche. It was
Mm.
unbelievable.
I remember
So,
that.
it was
Yep.
fun to be in the middle of that.
Well, I remember
No
walking in the
kidding.
studio one time, and I came in, I tell this story occasionally about how when I first came to Nashville, my preconception of it was the old, 70s,
60s too,
country
yeah.
music. And I
Mhm.
actually went, I never told you this, Ed, but I actually went out and bought a pair of cowboy boots, so I could wear them to Nashville. And and all of a sudden, when I'm pitching tunes, walking into people's offices, they're wearing like, Nikes and Adidas, and I'm going, oh, I,
Whoops.
somehow or another, I didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
You know, like, but but for our listening audience, that's the whole point. Our listening audience, most people have a preconceived idea because of what they see on the stage. They see the spotlights, they
Mhm.
see the image that a whole lot of money's been spent on creating the image of the artist. And I remember walking in, I I don't know if it was the Money Pit. It was one of the studios you were working at with
Money pit. Yeah.
Martina. So
Yeah.
Martina and I walked in and there's this little lady sitting over there in the corner or something, and you and the little lady were having a conversation, and I walked in and you and I were talking, and he said, "Hey, Craig, I want you to meet Martina McBride." And I turned over and, of course, it wasn't what I was expecting, and you just did it so casually, and that had a profound effect on me. It's like, this is where it all takes place. This is the real deal. This is really
Mhm.
where the cogs doing. You did it with Peter Frampton. I walked in one time and Peter Frampton standing. Hey, Craig, I want you to meet Peter Frampton. And you're just you know everybody. And the thing that impressed me the most, we've talked with Pat Buchanan, is you've got such a level head and such a grasp on the reality of it. In fact, Pat Buchanan says that he calls whatever you say the Ed C scrolls.
Oh, yeah. I worked on Pat for 10 years because I knew him in Atlanta, and he was
Yep.
a fast gun down there on guitar. Had
Yep.
worked with Cameo and
Mhm.
Hall and Oates and all these different things, and yet I said, you got to come to Nashville. You just got to. I worked on it for 10 years. Finally, he did, and it was the best movie he could have ever made.
And he admits that too. He said, and he gives you total credit because he said in our podcast that you told him you got to come to Nashville, and he was like, yeah, I don't know, and he said, I'm glad I listened to Ed.
That is so funny because I was at his house one day and he told me, he said, I'm moving to Nashville. And he had all kind, he was like an icon here in Atlanta. So
Yeah.
I ended up doing some of his work that he had here. Of course, I didn't do it like Pat would do it, but I was barely hanging in. But Mark, what you got for Ed?
Well, I was going to say, I was going to go back to, you were talking about Highway 101 and the big drum sound. And I remember when I grew up an Eagles fan and a Bob Seger fan, but I was never really a country music fan because I was basing it on the 60s. And it was, like you said, kind of a lot of strings and kind of, it's like, yes. And then I remember I had a buddy, I was out in music school in LA in about 88, and he was saying, no, man, country's changed. You need to start listening to it. And I remember the first time I heard Highway 101 and Cactus Mosier on the drums, and I remember going, oh, this is country?
Yeah.
Man, I mean,
Oh, he was slamming them. Yeah.
he
Oh, yeah.
was pounding those skins. I was like, oh, this is sweet. Now, this I could get into. But so I was going to ask you, so you've worn both the producer and the engineer hats, and you kind of answered my question a little bit when you said you were working with Paul and he kind of taught you the production end of it. But is it it seems like, and again, this may be totally a misconception. Is it like if you're an engineer, you're an engineer, and if you're a producer, you're a producer, and you don't see too many people that have worn or continue to wear both hats. And is that something that you kind of, when you were engineering, were you thinking one day, I want to produce, or is it just kind of organically happened?
It organically happens. Really, it's a situation where traditionally, or was when, I started, and before me and after me, if I'm engineering and I'm sitting next to the producer, uh, usually we know each other, and
Mhm.
sometimes he'll say, "What do you think?" And I said, "I don't know. I think the snare was better before." And a little
Sure.
conversation there, or um, one of the things that made it easy for me was that um, it was early on that I realized, like even in high school, that music was my friend. I
Mhm.
understood music. I got it. I understood, I played in not only trombone, but I played bass and guitar. Um, um, good on trombone, good on bass. Guitar, I moved up here and realized I wasn't a guitar player, I was a guitar owner. And
Yeah. A lot of people
because
feel that way
there's
in Nashville, trust
there's
me.
so many people that are
Oh, well,
just unbelievable,
yeah,
uh,
no
but the
kidding.
thing is, and while I was in school, I was in the orchestra and the jazz band and the marching band and all the organizations, and so it's really second nature for me to talk sharps. And is it sharp? Is it flat? Are you
Mhm.
rushing? Are you dragging? Is the
Mhm.
tone good? Is the tone raunchy? Is it thin? Communication. And most engineers get into this either through the musical end, like I did, or through the technical end. Like, well, I can rip into the console, not me, but they can rip into the console and pull out the soldering gun and fix stuff. And because of that, they wind up sitting in the engineering seat because of the
Sure.
value of what they can do.
Sure.
Technically, I'm not that guy, you know. What I can bring to the table is I know why something works and why it doesn't work, and well, because you're playing a completely different chord, and they're rubbing and that kind of
Mhm.
thing. I can talk music to people that are trying to
Sure.
make music, um, and so all of a sudden, and I've told this story before. A good friend of mine, I wasn't sitting there when this happened, but he mentioned it. He was in New York and he was on a session. I think he was assisting the engineer. He wasn't the producer, but he was assisting the engineer on a Eric Clapton album. And so, the engineer either had to go to the dentist or he had to go home, there was a car problem or something, he had to go, so I can't remember why, and he turned to the guy and says, "Hey, can you cover this for me? I gotta go home, run home, and, I'll be back maybe tomorrow or whatever." So, the guy says, "Yeah, okay." So he's sitting there, and at the end of the night, Clapton said, "Hey, can you, we need some roughs on this. Can you rough out this stuff?" He said, "Sure." So he's, at one of the big studios. I don't know if it's Electric Lady or Record Plant or one of the big ones, and so he's roughing it out, and Clapton said, "Man, this sounds great. Why don't you mix the record?" It can happen like that, and that quite
Yeah.
often it does happen like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the artist says, "I like what you're doing," and uh, so that's
Okay.
a
That
lot of
makes
times it's a blurring. It's not just I'm
Mhm.
sitting here and you're sitting there. Now, and a lot of times because, um, I know engineering from a musical standpoint as far as,
Mhm.
uh some of the basic stuff, obviously, but, uh, how to make stuff sound good, how to make a snare sound good. What are we going for here? You want high and cracking, or you want deep and thuddy, or, room
Mhm.
mics or toms or whatever, I can understand that language because I've played in almost all the different genres other than opera. I don't go
Mhm.
there, I'm not your opera guy, but,
Not a lot of heavy drumming goes on in opera
no,
anyway,
not
so
usually. But, anyway, it's, all it's because of having sat
Sure.
next to people playing the horns that I'm playing or my guitar or it's the language I understand, and, so I think that really helped me bridge the gap, and a lot of times that gets you invited to the party.
I've got a kind of gonna take a side road here. When the pandemic hit, I gave you a phone call just to check, say hello to you, and everybody was calling everybody and saying, "Hey, man, hope you're doing." We
Yeah,
were all getting kind of lonely,
yeah.
and so I called you, and I can remember distinctly. I was walking on a trail right outside my house here, walking near the river, and you were, "Man, I'm doing this cool project." Now, my facts might be wrong, so I don't want to spit them out too much, but you had gotten something from Elvis's catalog, something about, gospel music,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and you were telling me about that. You said something about, "I'm sitting here listening to Elvis's voice in my headphones right now."
That's
Tell us just a little bit. You don't have to talk too
Oh, yeah.
much about it, but
No,
that was a cool story, man.
it was a great album. Um, I got the call to, engineer on this project, um, and it was, uh, of course, Elvis loved gospel music. I mean, he would warm up at the start of almost all of his sessions and gather around and play these gospel songs and kinda just loosen up and get, in gear. He really loved that stuff, and he was great. He was These tapes I was hearing, were like
phenomenal gospel
60, oh
singer.
my gosh, early
Yeah.
'60s up
Mm.
to '67 or '8, you can't believe how good a singer he was. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm hearing the actual 3-track tapes that were recorded 2 blocks away over at RCA Studio B, and phenomenal. You crying in the chapel,
Oh,
and you hearing take 1, take 2, take 3, and usually there was no it's so different. You would start it, or they would start it because I'm listening to the takes, and somebody made a mistake, or he wasn't happy with that one. Let's do another one. And you went until Elvis got happy with the vocal. And because there was no punching in, there was no, well, we're gonna comp you together, Elvis. I mean, we were on 3-track back then. I mean, we were, I wasn't, but and so we had all these tapes, and somebody said, well, let's do a gospel album. Okay. There'd been other gospel albums out there. Uh, but why don't we take these, get the tapes from, of course, we had to get it cleared from New York, RCA, the original tapes, take the original vocals off of that, and put a new band of modern best of town session players. And as if Elvis walks into Ocean Wave Studios over there and says, hey guys, I want to make a gospel record. What do you think? They would say, yeah. So it's basically that. They were sitting there, and we'd have Elvis, his vocal, and we would have taken away the other stuff that was on the 2 tracks, and the other,
mhm.
and the band is playing. And I mean, to have Elvis singing in your ear while you're playing, it was like, wow,
That's awesome.
it was incredible. I mean, it really was incredible.
I
That's
remember that story.
awesome.
I was just amazed at that story.
I
That
mean,
is cool.
people don't, I mean, everybody knows Elvis was a great singer and legendary, but you just can't believe. I mean, these were like straight from the vault. It wasn't like they had been
Right.
enhanced or any of that. His pitch was great. His tone was great.
His phrasing was amazing.
Phrasing was tremendous. It was
Oh.
just like he came out fully formed. He
I
was
was gonna say, he sang like he'd been singing black gospel for 40 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've heard some stuff, it may have even been the project you worked on, and I just remember just going, man, he got no credit for being as, I mean, because he was such a worldwide star, people didn't realize, no, this cat could sing. This was not auto-tune, and I mean, this was just flat out just raise the roof singing, as my granddaddy used to say. But
He was so good. He for a good stretch there, he was the highest paid motion picture actor in America with all
right.
those movies. And I even saw a bunch of those movies. Some of them, they kept making the same movie over and over again. But
Those are for the ladies, Ed. Those are really not for us anyway.
absolutely,
Elvis plays Elvis.
that's right.
Right.
But, yeah, it was a fun project.
Hi, this is Craig with Songwriter's Tales with Mark and Craig. Be sure to go back and check out our earlier episodes like episode 2 and episode 3, where you can find out about Mark and Craig and who are we?